Well, greetings and welcome to episode 30 of Bible 180. 180 episodes between Genesis and Revelation. We're on Exodus chapter 34 today, and then next episode we'll be stepping into Joshua when they get into the promised land. But as we begin today, I want to remind you of a comic strip I used to watch when I was a kid that was not watch, but read. Peanuts, right? And one of my memories was reading that comic strip, and what I remember most about it was Lucy's offer to hold the football for Charlie Brown. He was always reluctant to accept the offer because she invariably pulled it away just as his foot was about to connect with his ball and he'd go up and he'd land on his backside. Somehow she persuaded him to do it time and time again, and he thought, well, maybe this time she finally means it, but it happened again and again, and Charlie Brown didn't learn his lesson. We've been with Moses for a while since we've been entering the book of Exodus. We saw when he was put in an ark in a little boat floated down the river to escape the killing of all the firstborn sons from the Pharaoh, brought up in the Pharaoh's house. We saw him at the burning bush. We saw the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea. We saw Mount Sinai and the Ten Commandments. We talked about their wandering in the wilderness, how God asked Moses to lead them into the promised land. And it's kind of like a Charlie Brown moment, because today in Exodus 34, God brings Moses up to the top of Mount Nebo, overlooking the promised land. And in Deuteronomy 34, we read these words. The Lord showed Moses the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, all of Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. The Lord said to him, this is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. And then God says, I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there. Okay, he's up there looking over this beautiful promised land that God had made to the ancestors of Moses. God says, I've let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. Charlie Brown moment or what? Now, we'll get into the reason why God didn't let him into the promised land, but think of that for yourself. I think every one of us has some type of promised land, a goal, something we've sought after and longed for and worked for. Sometimes it's the type of marriage we want, or a job or career. Sometimes it's as basic as physical health. Sometimes we achieve it. Sometimes all we can do is look longingly at it, like Moses did over this land that was promised to him from Mount Nebo. Years ago, I was invited to the home of a farmer in the congregation I was serving. He wanted to show me the preparations that he had been making months in advance for a family reunion they were having in the summer. He wanted to show me all of the remodeling that they had done in the basement, the hot tub they were putting outside, the horseshoe pits that he had dug by hand, the camping area that he had cleared for the grandkids. It was a crisp October day. Warm days and cool nights. We went out in the woods. He showed me where he was tapping maple trees to make pure maple syrup that he was going to have plenty of for the reunion. He was so excited to show me all the preparations that he had done. And yet back in the woods, that farmer was able to tell me, he hadn't told his family yet even, that he'd been recently to the doctor, and the doctor told him that he had stage 4 cancer. He had maybe at most 6 months to live, and that he wasn't going to be able to see that reunion that he had been preparing for many months. Kind of like with Moses, I've let you see it with your eyes, but you're not going to go over there. And he didn't. He died before the family reunion. So, as we end with Deuteronomy, how do we make sense of what happened on Mount Nebo? Is pulling the football out and away the way that God still works? I mean, how do we have confidence in moving forward in life when we all know that there are deserving people who work every day of their lives to get to their promised land and they're not able to make it? If you haven't had a Mount Nebo experience, you probably will at some point in your life. So how do you make sense of it? How do you keep believing in spite of difficult situations? How do we live between promise and fulfillment? Well, let me suggest that there's a biblical pattern for the way that God works in our lives. In our context of today, Deuteronomy 34, let me suggest 6 phases or stages that show us that God really does know what God is doing, even on Mount Nebo, when Moses didn't receive the promise like he thought he would. The first stage that God works with us on is God gives us a dream. God gives you a dream, an idea, a goal, a challenge, a promise, a desire, or an ambition. Whenever God puts a claim on someone's life, God starts with a dream. I might do one day this. Maybe it's a dream of a new business or a new relationship or a new start or a new house, whatever it is. God gives us a dream. God gave Noah the dream of building an ark. God gave Abraham the dream of being the father of a great nation. God gave David the dream of being a king. God gave Joseph the dream of a multicolored dreamcoat that one day his brothers would all bow down to him. God gave Nehemiah the dream of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. God always starts with a dream because nothing really happens in a person's life if it doesn't start with a dream. Second stage or phase is a decision. That is your decision. Are you going to follow that dream or not? A dream isn't something that's followed. Otherwise, it just becomes a worthless dream. A decision places you on a path to do what it takes to accomplish your dream, to invest your time, your reputation, your energy in that dream. Abraham, as we saw, had to let go of his homeland, his friends, his everything in order to follow where God was leading him. Moses had to make the difficult decision of leaving a promising career in Pharaoh's house in order to follow God's will. Even though he killed that guy, he still ran. Nehemiah made the decision to ask the king for a favor before he started rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. There's always a decision that's made following a dream, because faith is a verb. Faith is an active verb, not a passive verb. First the dream, then the decision. Third stage is delay. Delay. That's where so many of us get bogged down. God gives you a dream, you may pursue it, but God doesn't always fulfill our dreams immediately because there's always a lapse, a time lapse, a waiting period, a delay. That's why the biblical pattern of dream, decision, and delay. Noah waited 120 years while he was building the ark for it to rain. And then when he finally got in the ark, the rain was delayed for 7 days while he waited. Abraham waited 99 years for a son. Moses spent 40 years while wandering in the wilderness. Joseph waited for years in prison after being falsely accused. David waited years after being anointed king to actually become king. Jesus waited 30 years to be commissioned for his 3 years of ministry. And that's why it's important for us not to take that delay as denial. When a dream is delayed, we might start to question, God, when are you going to do it? I've been waiting. It's been a month, it's 6 months, whatever it is. Part of the learning process is that a delay is not a denial. And part of spiritual maturity is learning the difference between no and not yet. I mean, we teach our kids sometimes that delayed gratification is a good thing. Delay is a part of the biblical pattern. Fourth stage is difficulty. Difficulty. I've come to believe that a very real way that God works with us is in difficulty. Imagine the difficulties Moses faced while leading 1 million people across the desert without porta potties or Happy Meals. I mean, imagine the difficulty of Noah building an ark to organize a floating zoo. Let's see. You can't put snakes next to the birds, and you have to keep the mice away from the elephants, you know? I mean, imagine the difficulties David faced after being anointed by Saul, only to be chased all over the countryside with a king who's out to kill him. Imagine the difficulties of Joseph, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, accused of sexual misconduct, thrown in jail. Difficulties are a part of the process until you finally throw up your hands and realize you've come to the end of your resources, you're exhausted your ability to move forward, you've come to the end of your rope. And that's where the fifth stage comes in of how God works. You come to a dead end. You come to a dead end. There's no way out, around, up, or under. You're at the end of your rope. You're out of gas without a gas station for miles. Your get up and go is got up and went. Kind of like a couple episodes ago when God brought them into that cul-de-sac when they were escaping from the Pharaoh. Mountains on both sides, Pharaoh behind them, Red Sea in front of them. They were at a dead end and they started to grumble. Maybe it would have been better to stay in Egypt, they said to Moses. At least there we had bread and water, and they complained about the dead end. And maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you've had that feeling. You're about to go bankrupt. Your problems in your marriage are bringing you to your wits' end, and you don't know what to do with your teenager. You're afraid that your life is falling apart. But you know what? That place, those words that describe that geographical cul-de-sac where they're boxed in, dead end, is in Hebrew the words God's hidden treasure. God's hidden treasure was right there where they were at the Red Sea, because when you're at a place where there's no way out, a dead end because you've done everything you could do, there's a hidden treasure there. Because when you're defeated and deflated and flat on your back at the bottom of the sea, the only thing you can do is look up. And remember that God specializes in the impossible. God's motto is impossible is nothing. Impossible is nothing. Because the sixth stage of the way God works is deliverance. Deliverance. God does a miracle when everything seems to be failing. God provides the solution. God makes good on God's promises. God parts the Red Sea. God gives Abraham a child at 100 years old. God provides a ram for the sacrifice instead of Isaac. And if God can raise Lazarus out of the tomb after 4 days and raise Jesus from the dead after a huge boulder had been rolled up against it, you can be sure that God will provide for you. In Philippians, he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. The biblical pattern, stage of a dream, decision, delay, difficulty, dead ends before we finally come to God's deliverance means that God works in God's time. Our job, as I've said, is to trust. What God starts, God finishes. God doesn't just lead you out on a branch and then cut it off. What God starts, God finishes, and where God guides, God provides. So keep connected to God. Keep listening to these episodes as we go through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation and see the storyline of deliverance that happens again and again, even when people seem to be at a dead end. Hang in there. Make it a great day. I look forward to being with you for the next episode, and until then, take care. Bye-bye.